Hello and welcome to another episode of the Unfinished Cubby podcast. In this episode, I'm talking with my brother, Nick Randall. This was recorded after we had for me, very early morning, for him, very late at night, catch-up Zoom call. I had mentioned to him I wanted to have him on my podcast, and he sort of prepared a little bit to talk about. It's a great conversation. It starts without a proper introduction, as you will notice shortly. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Here we go.
Zizek is kind of I guess he's a bit like Jordan Peterson. But he's a bit like he is an actual philosopher, whereas Jordan Peterson's kind of just a psychologist who got famous because he was controversial. Zizek is kind of a rock star philosopher, like he's kind of synonymous with the rise of the web, and he's just critical of everything.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So he's kind of cool. So this is someone's interpretation of him criticizing Buddhism. Well, not Buddhism, but kind of. So Sam Harris, I don't know if you've heard of Sam Harris.
Yeah. I've watched a fair bit of his debates with Jordan Peterson, in fact.
Okay.
That's probably the only reason I know him. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my friends really likes Sam Harris, and he's got the Waking Up app, and Sam Harris is really critical of religion, but then he says, we need a secular religion because there's good stuff there. So this criticism of it is basically saying that maybe it's just like, is it just making you feel better, which is the same as taking, like, if there was a chemical that did that, then there'd be no difference, sort of thing.
Does what make you feel better?
Well, is meditation, I mean, like he's saying that to some degree meditation is just, well, here he compares it to essentially like a kind of like sexual, like a little device you use for sexual gratification, like just make you feel better. Just like, it's like capitalism makes you stressed all the time, so we need a way to deal with that. So we have now Buddhism, which helps with that.
Okay, so there's some physiological effect that occurs if we can just simulate that chemically or in some other way. Isn't that all it is?
Yeah. I mean, Buddhism is supposed to be about like understanding the nature of reality as suffering, essentially, and accepting suffering. And he's sort of saying that, just spending a lot of time breathing and stuff kind of just makes you feel better. And yeah, it's a little bit over the top, the article, but like Zizek is kind of a Marxist, or he's definitely like a capitalist, like he's against capitalism, or he's critical of capitalism, highly critical. And like he talks about like he's also Freudian, so he talks about like why, like he doesn't like this idea of capitalism, which is like you do what you want. Like if people buy something, it's because it's what they want. So we sort of the last, like the central moral question is, what do people want? Do you want to do that or not, right? So if you buy it, it means it's worth something because you've bought it. And he sort of like, he really has this like psychoanalytic perspective where he says like, do people even want the things that they want? Like one of his favorite things is like the man who's having an affair, and he's got this tension of like, I've got my wife and I love her, but then I've got my affair and I'm so lustful and exciting. And he said like in his fantasies, he wants this he wants to resolve the tension and just like leave with the lover. But it's actually the state of being in in between, the sort of the anxiety and the sort of desperation and the sort of passion, and that's what makes him happy.
Yeah. I reflected on that kind of stuff a lot last year. I did a lot of work for a while. I was really focused on building the brand of co-creations and going, which is why I started the podcast. That's where the idea came from. I did a lot of work though. You do like your mission statement and your vision statement. And I actually said this in another podcast, like the thing is it's my company and it's, you know, built around, you know, what I love and how my life is and stuff like that. So it also was a big question of like, who am I and what am I about, which is something I've always struggled with a lot. And I read a lot last year of DeMartini's stuff. Have you come across him at all? I think his stuff informs a lot of what they do at Elemental Formations, the kind of underlying thing there. That's where Angel works making the crystal lamps. And they sort of admire them for a number of reasons. One being that they've always been really clearly values focused in everything they do. Like that's what motivates the couple that started. And they've got this framework called it's escaping my mind right now, but also the fact that they grew from like one employee to 40 and like multiple outlets and just massive in 1 year. Impresses me.
Really?
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, one of the DeMartini's books is called The Values Factor, and also this process, because they invited me along. They put on workshops for all their staff at Elemental Formations to learn this particular derivative of his stuff, which I can't think of the name of right now.
Wow. Yeah.
But in both cases, like the process for figuring out your values, which is what it is about writing down like what you spend time thinking about, what you spend your money on, what you talk to other people about, what you use your technology for. And the point of it is, what you're actually doing is what you value. Whatever narrative you have around that of, I wish I was this and this, like actually we're quite free agents and we do what we choose to do. And so you need to, so it's kind of interesting. And you might know, there's a philosopher who talks a lot and has like a good way of categorizing those two distinct levels or forms of desires. That one, which is like, I aspire to be this particular human, that I'm going to meditate for an hour every day and then exercise for an hour, and I'm not going to have a cigarette today or drink tonight, and I'm going to make sure I help my fellow man. And then the one that gets up and is like, oh man, actually I'm going to sleep in for another hour and instead. And those are two, those are both desires within my being, but one is of this idealized version. One is, and I don't know, that also I guess ties into just instant gratification versus delayed gratification. And the marshmallow experiment?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be like the strongest predictor for all kinds of success.
Right, I get what you're saying. So you're saying, like, sometimes what you're saying is that it's about teasing out like a deeper desire or something, like rather than just sort of staying in these patterns of how you already live, unconscious living versus more conscious.
I guess, I don't know. Personally, I don't know I don't have a reconciliation for those two things. And it was interesting doing a lot of those processes last year and going, all right, this that you're spending time on, this is what you value.
Yeah, sure. That is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going through the process is definitely good. Reflecting, I think, is good. I think the point in this article was like, um, you know, trying to come up with a spirituality that people like. He talks about the people at Davos, you know, this like economic forum, um, inviting along a Buddhist, and then everyone sort of practicing, and then like and um, it's like you're trying to find something that won't disrupt. You know, you're trying to find a spirituality that is about reflection, but that doesn't disrupt the economic order.
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
So it's yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. It's an interesting thing. Because I was thinking about it too, like with the individual, like this is sort of the work-life balance thing is like is sort of like in a way it's this really positive development. Like we have gone from, you know, this really traditional society where we all followed roles, and you know that was determined by your gender, and there weren't a lot available anyway. You sort of, you know, provider for your family, or you were the took care of the kids, and that's like really not cool anymore. So what is sort of becoming central is like, what do you want as a person? So it is a good thing, sort of like, it is a good thing that we aren't so determined by sort of capitalism's needs, because we can, you know, be more flexible at work. You can have, there's also things like, well, Germany is really good with like maternity leave. Like you have like a year, which you sort of get completely off and it's all paid for. Um, you know, that's really good. And that's really good for balancing out the needs. Like you're also, it's like not just all about money. It's like for a while, we're going to value child rearing, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's really cool. And that can be like a political thing. It can be like, you know, women shouldn't only have this role as caretakers, but that, you know, those things should be balanced out more. Men should be able to take care of kids. The family should be valued not just as a sort of an economic thing, which allows the men to keep working, but also as on its own merit sort of thing. But like the other side of individualism is like if you I wrote this thing down, I want to read it again.
So you prepped for us to have a philosophical podcast discussion
That's what
this
you
morning.
asked for.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. So maybe I will do a mini one of this conversation as just a teaser of a snippet future, more in-depth ones as well. But
yeah, right. Well, yeah, so what were we going to say?
Please read it.
Okay. So, well, I'll read it then, yeah. So the problem is, or why we should at least be skeptical of accepting let me just backtrack for a sec. So yeah, okay. So if you're talking about a political sort of ideal of like placing, you know, the needs of the individual, the needs of the family back at the center, and that sort of disrupting the economic imperative, that's a good thing. But like, it's worth asking, why is the needs of the individual so important to begin with? So that's sort of what I was talking about with Zizek. It's like, do you really like, is what I do, or is what I want as an individual, should that really be the central thing, like the central moral concern?
Well, that's because that's a relatively new idea, right? Like
It is. It's like, it's liberalism. It's like the individual is the
Okay,
center.
yeah. And so, do you know where's the origin of liberalism? How long have we sort of had that as a?
Really interesting. I'm reading a book about it that Dad sent me. So it's come out at like, so say if you want to be a starting point, say the sort of religious struggles in England in like 1500s.
All right.
Yeah. At this first time that people were starting to sort of express these ideas about like the state not determining for people, because there was a lot of political upheaval and stuff, and it was like there was a lot of back and forth between Catholics and Protestants, and the press, also the press came out at the time, so the printing press.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. No, I was just going to say, is that like Luther then as well? Which of course it is. And
Yeah. So Luther is obviously also part of it, the Reformation.
Yeah.
But that was where some of these ideas were first expressed. And then if you fast forward a bit to, these articles, they would bring out these pamphlets where people were starting to express radical ideas. There was even ideas like, people were still accepting the idea of kings. Like there wasn't like, let's rule the country ourselves. That was a bit too radical, but it was about like limiting power. And there was actually models for that in England at the time already, where there was a kind of a parliament that had a little bit of rights. And during that time, it took a lot more power. So it sort of started the constitutional monarchy thing.
Yeah, right. Because otherwise, right? Okay, so because you had kings, but not a constitution.
So you had kings, and then you had like a small group of you had a king, and then you had a few other people that had some power, and they were probably lords, and there were certain things that the king needed them for, mostly like raising taxes, I think. So for him to have money, he needed to do that. He needed to go through these people, and that was like a tradition for, going way back into the past that had gone on. There's this thing called Magna Carta, which is part of that. Like, Magna Carta just means big piece of paper.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Is that from that time?
Yeah, so that's what first laid down that constitution kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Okay.
But I mean, it's all very rudimentary. Like it's like, even when there was lots of upheaval, but people weren't really like, let's get rid of the king and have everyone vote. Like it was sort of early struggles. Anyway, then the idea came up again in the French Revolution. I'm just outlining what this guy suggests in his book. He talks about the really interesting thing is, so the French Revolution comes along, and it's like the king is gone, and then power is taken in the hands of other people. But then what really quickly happens is it becomes way more repressive than under the king, because it's called the White Terror, and all kinds of people are guillotined. Like, more people are executed than ever before in history, and it's much worse than you had under a monarchy.
Who was in control then? Was it like was it just the people who, like, was it the rebel group that had risen up and killed royalty? Yeah. And that, did they have a like a philosophical underpinning name or anything like that?
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Who is that?
I want to say Montesquieu. No, it's Robespierre, I think. Robespierre? I'm getting confused. One of the actual revolutionaries was called Robespierre. What's his name? One of the sort of insidious ideas, anyway, that came from this philosopher, his name I can't remember, was called the general will, right? And it was supposed to be like, he had outlined the stuff, and this is what often happens. It happens with the Nazis too. Someone outlines a philosophy. It can be kind of innocuous, like they're just talking about ideas, and then a regime comes in like that and starts to implement it, and it's like, it means people are killed, So the general will was like this sort of mystical idea that the people, like the true ruler, who's sort of charismatic, will, implement the will of the people. And
that's interesting. That's kind of like a replacement for acting on God's behalf, right?
Yeah.
It's like I'm doing this because this is what everybody wants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was like, it's not even, it could even be something that a lot of people didn't actually say they wanted. It was more like the general will was this mystical thing of like, you're forcing them to be free. Like, we're forcing them to sort of, do what they truly need, sort of thing. So it was completely unbounded and therefore totally dangerous, because if somebody said we're acting on the general will, there was nothing anyone could do to stop them, sort of thing.
Sure. And it has the same kind of feedback. It's the same thing today, right? Like, don't question the like, as in, if you can get enough people to trust that you're acting on behalf of the people and it's the right thing to do, then I don't know what that's called, that mechanism whereby then you quash anyone who sort of questions that, then, right? Like
well,
you
today
see
it would
it.
be populism. I mean, the populists, they claim to be acting on the behalf of the true will of the people over against the elites, who they say is everyone that disagrees with them. I mean,
Okay, absolutely. But it's been used forever, and certainly like all of in our lifetime, like and I guess there's always another. What I'm thinking about is like the Vietnam War, okay, like, and how illegal and dangerous and demonized it was to question that, right?
okay.
And then, yeah, popularism in right now in our time. But this notion where you get people like I guess kind of the mob mentality to support and reinforce an idea. That's a powerful mechanism in societal movement and control of people.
Yeah, so that's a great, if I can, like,
all right, yeah,
connect at that exact point. John Stuart Mill, this is sort of the guy. I'd always heard the name, I never knew anything about him. He was sort of the guy in liberalism, because he, like, post the so he was a contemporary. He saw, the French Revolution happening. Everyone did in Europe. It was, horrifying to, Europe, because it was, first of all, the kings were gone. So monarchs were like terrified it was going to happen in their own countries. But of course, also then what came after was like terrible. So everyone was sort of like, suddenly this isn't a good idea. So he reflected on all of that stuff. But also, very interestingly, he just was a bit different. Like, he'd been brought up he'd been brought up with this really strict education. Like, he was, I don't know, reading Greek when he was 5, this sort of stuff. And like when he was 18 or 19, he had a nervous breakdown, and then he sort of started to put the pieces back together by kind of rejecting some of the things he'd learned as a child. And he'd been brought up like very strictly, and he started to like get used to get into poetry and sort of the non-intellectual side of life. And this was really profound for him. And then he met this woman, and she was married, and I should know her name. That would be very feminist of me to know it. She was actually super important for his development, intellectual development. So they talked together and whatever, but they lived this unconventional life because she was married and they were essentially together, but that couldn't happen. What he started writing down and talking about was that, so you've got the freedom from the state, which was this sort of traditional liberal thing where, leave us alone. We just want to do what we want. And then you remove power from the monarch. But then you have what happened in France, which is a complete disaster, where the people take power and they become much more repressive before. So he says that is actually worse. And what we need to be free of is not just state power, but we need individuals need to be free of control from others around them, from society around them. And the reason is just partly just because we don't even always know what we ourselves want. So we shouldn't have others telling us what we want. So I mean, it's like
cool.
The fascinating thing with him is he just put this together as a or he and she together, this team, as like a, you know, they created an ideal where there wasn't one before, right? So they put something in words and they argued for it really, you know, powerfully. So that's why he's sort of remembered as one of the central guys of liberalism. So it's like, yes, no state control, but also this idea that like there has to be a boundary around the individual, and that has to come down to that there has to be space where I can do what I want. This is a central sort of liberal thing too, right? Like the state or other people can come this far and can tell me what to do in that far, and then there's a part of me where I'm free. And he also came up with the harm principle. So this is what they put together. They said, I can do what I want if it doesn't harm anyone else.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And they talked about it in detail, and it wasn't just this like dumb thing they said. Like they really went down into how it can be applied and stuff, because it's really not easy. There's, you know, as soon as you say it, there's another question: what is harm? And like, is it harmful if, you know, if you take drugs? Well, it could be, because it could harm others. You know, like it's room, there's room for debate. He even, this is really interesting, because what happened earlier this year with Trump, he said, they said this particular example, they said, like, I think it was like, if you had a mob in front, like someone can criticize, let's say, I can't remember the exact example, let's say, someone could criticize the tea industry for their high prices, but it's totally different if there's a mob all standing around this like tea magnate's house, and they're all like shouting and baying for blood, and you start to give the same speech. So like context can be that it could be considered harm then if you got a mob waiting there to attack someone. Very interesting, because it's even like this year with, you know, that was sort of the debate. Did Trump, you know, did he, I mean, he didn't directly say to them, go and, you know, go and shoot people and stuff, but there's a context.
The message was there in the context. What happened with that? Is he on trial with that or anything? I haven't followed that news at all.
He didn't get impeached.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's right. There was an impeachment, second impeachment. Okay. Cool. Well, I like John and whoever his unknown female companion was as the parents of liberalism. Then, yeah, because those are.
I think one thing that I really liked about the book is there was him, but there was another guy, a French guy, who he was actually like super rich and stuff, and really eccentric, and had all these millions of affairs with women, and just kind of a crazy guy. And he was another guy who was central to John Stuart Mill, like an influence. And he wasn't that political or whatever, but he was basically just saying, just leave me alone and let me do what I want. And that should be a central premise to everything. Just leave people alone and let them. And it's just interesting, because the personalities sometimes that were writing about liberalism were just weird people, you know, they were just kind of these freaks who were like, leave me alone, because I want to do what I want to do. And that is I find that very fascinating, because it's such a, like, liberalism is so influential. It's such an iron law almost, and it sort of determines so much of how the entire world works now. And it came down to sort of freaks, you know.
I really identify with that. I think I'm rich in in family and community and friendships, that just guides me so much that I just want my own space. I just want to be left alone. That's kind of, I hunger for that so much, and I do feel like a bit of a freak for it. Harriet was John's partner, Harriet Taylor Mill.
Harriet Taylor, yeah.
We better include that. Yeah, I just remembered. No, I thought we should include it if this is, if some people are getting educated by this podcast. She was a philosopher and women's rights advocate as well. So,
yeah, they're really, they were kind of like early feminists. Interesting.
That partnership, the way you describe it, reminds me of, and this is, I can't think of his partner either, Jean-Paul Sartre, and his very feminist. She's awesome.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Let me see if I can remember this in a similar way. Simone
de Beauvoir,
de Beauvoir, yeah, because she was quite a canon feminist person too, I believe.
Yeah, for sure.
I read a lot about them a long time ago, and I remember sort of falling in love with both of them a bit.
Yeah, I think that Jean-Paul Sartre was a bit of a freak too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, but you need to be, right? Like, I mean, by definition, you are if you're questioning what everybody else takes for granted.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, he's like, he was in prison. He was imprisoned by the Nazis, and that was a big thing for him because he was writing about freedom.
Jean-Paul Sartre.
Huh?
Sartre or John?
Sartre, yeah.
Yeah, right. Cool. I didn't even know that. Nick, this is awesome. You have brought a whole lot here. This is what I'm thinking. These are my thoughts as of right now in this moment. First of all, Angel's got a prac today, and I want to spend a little bit of time with her and have some breakfast with her. It's 10 to 7 now, and she'll be at the hospital at 8. So I want to wrap up. And I'm sorry to do that because this has been an awesome conversation. I would like to have more conversations like this with you because I love talking to you about this stuff, and I love your knowledge of it, and I love the way that you present it. And I've said this before, how you present kind of these broad driving philosophical things and then give them a contemporary context and go, well, the world is like this because of these philosophical ideas. Yeah, and I think you've done that incredibly with John Stuart Mill today. That's awesome. I had no idea of that. I had also heard the name, but had no knowledge of who that person was. But I think I want to release, I think what I want to do, I want to call it Philosophy Hour with Nick Randall, and then it'll also have another title. And this one, I think I want to call A Brief History of Liberalism. Does that'll sound agreeable?
Yeah, that sounds fun.
And so the other thing, the way I've been splicing these is I generally have a talk for a while with the person, and then I'm like, all right, let's start now. And I say, welcome to the podcast. And then I've been splicing that first part in at the end after a gap, which I just think feels nice because if you've listened to it and you enjoyed it, maybe you want to listen to some more.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll need to do this one differently because we haven't said that at any point. So I'm going to do the intro now, and I'll actually put that at the beginning.
Okay.
So here we go with the intro. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Unfinished Cubby podcast. With me today is my brother, Nick Randall, who is a philosopher and whom I love speaking with about all kinds of philosophy. Today we're talking a little bit about John Stuart Mill and liberalism, and it's a brief conversation, but an interesting one, and one of many to come. Nick, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to be here.
All right, let's just pause and then perhaps flow into some other conversation.